Elvis, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. The man charged with murdering these students last November, Bryan Kohberger, is going to be back in court very soon, in just under 30 minutes or so. And the hearing about this is really going to determine how we can bring you coverage of this case moving forward as it moves toward trial later this year. Bryan Kohberger is asking Judge John Judge to ban cameras from the courtroom. The media has formed a coalition, and that includes us here at Law&Crime, and we are asking that cameras be allowed. We're also asking that the gag order in the case be vacated so we can bring you information about the case. The state and the prosecution want that gag order to remain in place. We have a great panel to answer your questions today. Bobby Chacon is a retired FBI agent and lawyer. Joseph Scott Morgan is a forensic death investigator and the host of the Body Bags podcast. And Michael Bryant is an attorney and host here at the Law&Crime Network. Guys, thanks for being with us today. We have some great questions coming in from our viewers, and we want you to keep those coming. Submit them to us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram, and we'll get to as many of them as we can as we move the show forward. But I want to start out with our first question from a viewer, and it comes from Long Beach Mamba from YouTube. Joseph, I'll throw this one to you. This whole case has me confused. So why did they say he allegedly did it? What was his motive? What are they hiding? So there are three questions there, Joseph. What do you say to that question from Long Beach Mamba?
Well, Long Beach Mamba, thank you for trusting me with all of this information. That's a lot to unpack in a very short period of time.
It is.
I'll try. First off, there is apparently biological connectivity between Bryan Kohberger and that scene, or at least some of the evidence that they have collected from that scene. And so I think that just from a forensic standpoint is probably the most compelling thing that they have. And we don't know how much of that evidence there is at this point in time. Of course, we've seen videography of them unpacking, the crime scene and hauling a lot of that stuff away, but also his apartment. And let's don't forget the infamous car is out there as well. And so they have possession of all of this stuff. So it sounds like from a physical evidence standpoint, I think that all signs point to him as far as the authorities are concerned. Can I have the next part of the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, the next part of the question, I'm sorry to throw that three-parter at you. Maybe I should have broken it up into a bunch of them. But what was his motive? Joseph, we really don't know a lot about what the prosecution believes was behind this.
No, I don't. And, I don't know that anybody outside of that investigative bubble really knows at this point in time. And everything that we say is highly speculative. However, there's indication that there's social media interaction on some level, whether it was the victims interacting with him or him taking notice of them. It is quite compelling, I think. And so that's going to be, again, another bit of circumstantial evidence that might point back to some kind of at least perceived relationship that he may have had with one or more of these victims rather, at this scene.
I think it's important that we note, too, that we don't really know much about we know what we know from the probable cause affidavit. We don't know what the prosecution is claiming at this point in time, other than they say it was Bryan Kohberger. He, of course, is maintaining his innocence. He says he hopes to be exonerated, and they are moving toward trial, and they will be fighting this as far as we can tell. Michael, I want to go to you for our next question. It comes from Jams Row from YouTube. Do cameras really have that much of an influence over a jury? And Michael, the reason I throw this one to you is because you covered O.J. Simpson and the O.J. Simpson case. So do you think that cameras really have that much of an impact on jurors who are in the courtroom hearing the case and hearing the evidence?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it really comes down to the individual jurors. And I'm not talking about, the run-up to the trial, because anybody in the jury pool arguably can be affected by the publicity prior to being seated in the box. Once they're in the box, hopefully they're not watching or listening to any of that stuff. They're not supposed to. But the physical setting in the courtroom, cameras, even just one camera, and I know in Idaho that's their law, one camera still and video. We're not going to have multiples at best. It does create a different feel. It feels like, you're part of a TV show because, well, you are. So I don't know that it's a negative impact, but it would be wrong to say there isn't some impact, that it doesn't affect jurors in some way, that maybe they're more concerned about being identified sooner rather than later. It has an impact. I think we would all be arguing today it's not a negative impact, and that's kind of the nature of the arguments in front of the court today.
Mm-hmm. And that is a big part of the argument before the court today. Bryan Kohberger doesn't want cameras in his trial or in future hearings. The media has formed a coalition, including Law&Crime. We are asking that cameras be allowed. We think it's really important, and this is an important case. Bobby Chacon, I'm going to send this question to you. You're a retired FBI agent and a lawyer. Marley Glasheen from Facebook asks, what is a gag order? There is a gag order in this case that both the prosecution and the defense agreed to when the charges were first filed.
Yeah, actually, the gag order in this case goes even further. I believe it applies to the families of the victims, which is kind of unusual. And so a gag order simply means that in most cases, the prosecution and the defense, anybody on those teams, the lawyers, the representatives of the people themselves, cannot comment publicly on the case, on the evidence. No documents can be released, no statements can be made. In this case, both the defense and the prosecution supported that gag order. The family, however, at least one of the families does not. They've been more vocal, at least in the early part of this investigation. So I think the gag order even applies down the line to the family who are, potential witnesses in this case.
Mm-hmm. And that's the family of Kaylee Gonsalves. Her father, Steve Gonsalves, and mother, Christy, were very outspoken in the beginning of this. You'll recall, as we were covering this back in November and December, even January, Steve Gonsalves wanted answers, and he wasn't getting the answers that he felt he was entitled to or that he deserved. And he gave many, many interviews, and he was very frustrated with the pace of the investigation. Joseph, something I want to ask you about with regard to that. I think we can all understand all of the families feeling frustrated at points in time with not getting information. And we were frustrated as people covering this who were not getting any information at all from the authorities. We were getting a lot of talking points and we're continuing the investigation. But that really is to keep the integrity of the investigation in place. They don't put out a lot of information, and they may not have had a lot of solid information to put out.
Yeah, it's quite possible. And we also have to take another factor into consideration. The fabric of this case is different than many others. You're talking about arguably one of the most horrific crimes that's certainly taken place in this area of Idaho. You've got a local law enforcement body or multiple bodies there, and I'm talking about the locals, that have little or no experience in something, this large, this broad, if you will. And it is a bit intimidating. And sometimes, the old adage about sometimes it's better to keep your mouth shut. And I think that that's probably one of the little factors that's involved in here. So, yeah, we all wanted information. I can't imagine what the family was going through at that moment in time, and I do appreciate his frustration, the family's frustration. However, it is better to not reveal too much, before flying the metaphorical plane into the side of the mountain when the investigation, just so that you can satiate whatever desires other people might have that are not within that investigative bubble.
And just so people understand how small Moscow, Idaho is, the population of Moscow, Idaho, that's people who actually live within the city limits, is about 25,800 or so, 850 from what I'm seeing in my quick Google search. And it's a college town. So a lot of the people who are there during the school year are college students. So think about how small a population, a city of 25,000 is. That's incredibly small. And that is a police department that's used to patrolling around. You got drunk kids on campus and off of campus, having parties. Not a lot of homicides there. That's why the FBI, the Idaho State Police, many agencies were assisting with this case as it progressed from the investigative stage and now to the prosecutorial stage, where there are assistant attorney generals helping the prosecution. Let's ask another question. This one is from Butterfly Dana from YouTube. Has anything been found out about the grand jury hearing that happened where Kohberger's parents went before? I'm not going to throw that to anybody. I'm going to tell you, we've done a lot of digging on that issue. We can't tell you exactly what that grand jury proceeding was about. We know that they were subpoenaed, both the mother and the father. There was a lot of talk that it was related to another homicide investigation, but we really can't go into much detail about that. Our next question comes from Facebook. It is Carlotta Alford from Facebook. What led up to him actually taking a human life? Michael Bryant, we just don't know the answer to that question. What led up for him ultimately to actually take a human life?
Yeah, I mean, let the speculation begin. That's one of the challenges of a gag order, is that, the speculation goes rampant as to, in this case, why he may have done it, how it was done, if he did it. And so this specific question really gets into the weeds here. How do we know what happened if it was this guy, Mr. Kohberger, who got into that house that day, and some interaction took place that resulted ultimately in the deaths of 4 people? Who knows? Who knows if it was his interaction with one and others came to defend? We know that some were in different rooms and didn't seem to have any prior contact with whomever killed these 4. We don't know. It's total speculation. All we can assume, I think, is that something, this will sound ridiculous, but something went wrong. Something that may have begun as a more normal interaction went horribly wrong.
Something went terribly wrong, and we really don't know. We know that the family of Kaylee Gonsalves, Shannon Gray, the attorney for that family, told me several months back that they had done some digging. They did not believe Kaylee had any interaction with Bryan Kohberger. And so we don't know. There's so much about this case that we don't know. We'll do one more question. This one is from Tiffany Campbell from TikTok. Is Bryan the only suspect in this? Bobby Chacon. As far as we know, Bryan Kohberger is the only one charged in this case.
Yeah, I believe it's safe to assume that he's the only suspect right now that took part in this homicide. I mean, there are other probably things and avenues to look at, whether somebody helped him avoid capture or avoid suspicion, after the fact, kind of accessory after the fact type of behavior. There was some talk about maybe his father knew when they were driving across country, but not that the father ever knew beforehand. So, and that's all speculation. So I think that at this point in time, there's only reason to believe that he is the only suspect. I think that if they've moved along in this case so far now into the court proceedings, that if there was another suspect, they would have had to alert the defense to it. They would have had to, probably made a public statement about that, because you're talking about dangerous and violent criminals out in the community. And I would believe that, I would hope that they would make the public aware of that.
Well, and if somebody else happened to be involved in this, if they believed somebody else was involved, that could possibly help Bryan Kohberger's defense, because they could say, this wasn't our guy, it was that other guy. And I know there's a lot of stuff that's gone on social media, a lot of discussion and speculation, but we are just going to bring you the facts as we know them right now, and the allegations. Bryan Kohberger, of course, presumed innocent until proven guilty. And they say he did it, the state does, but at this point, he says he's not guilty and he's going to trial. We are going to continue to take your questions, but first we need to take a quick break, so keep them coming to us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. We've got you covered everywhere, so we'll be right back. Stay with us. I'm Anjanette Levy, and you are watching the Q&A Lunch Show on Law and Crime.